Okay, welcome back everybody. This is session 4 on hearing stream 5, day 1. We're through almost all the submitters. We have 4 more to hear in this final session, and we're going to hear from Federated Farmers, Francis Casey, who's finally agreed to come in a little bit earlier. Once we're running close to time. So thank you, Francis, for coming in.
Thank you.
We've read your submission and further submission. I couldn't see any additional evidence. Can you just clarify that to be the case?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm just going to come on today just to briefly explain a little bit about our submission and just to basically accept the Section 42A report. So it'll be pretty brief as well.
Okay, we're in your hands. Do you have any notes that you prepared at all, or are you just going to wing it?
I'll just wing it, thank you. So our submission sought amendments to the wording of the objectives and policies to require private landowner agreement ahead of protecting and maintaining the SASMs. So we accept the Section 42A report recommendation for our submission points, and just further acknowledge that the process taken to identify these sites involving landowners, which provides more confidence and certainty for landowners, and just to emphasise that our members do value that engagement. And yeah, so that's all I had to say about that. Thank you.
So if we record that Federated Farmers accepts the explanation and recommendation contained in the Section 42A report,
yes,
regarding engagement and liaison with landowners.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Carry on, please.
Oh, sorry, that's all I wanted to address today. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, that's all. Okay.
Thank you.
So you're not seeking any additional relief over and above what the officer has provided?
No, thank you.
Okay. I'll just check if there's any questions. It sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Nothing on my left, nothing on my right.
Right.
Well, you've got off very cheaply, Francis. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for coming in early.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Yes.
Online.
Yes. Good afternoon, Ainsley.
Kia ora koutou.
Hello. Are you good to go? We're a bit earlier than you were scheduled for.
Oh yes, perfectly fine.
Okay.
Just go for it.
Yes, go for it. We've read your pre-circulated statement of evidence. Are you going to? Would you like to speak to this more salient points that are there? And have you had a chance to read the summary statement?
Yes, I have. What I haven't done is I didn't have the ability to watch anything this morning, but I have read the introductory statements from the 42A officers.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Look, thank you again for your time today. My evidence records my agreement, firstly, with the Section 42A report recommendations in respect of all matters raised in Transpower's submission and further submission on the Notable Trees chapter. I've reviewed the introductory statement this morning in relation to notable trees, and note there's the one outstanding matter appears to be in relation to the use of the term pruning instead of trimming. And in this regard, I support the suggestion to use both the terms in the relevant provisions. I don't think that's overly verbose and would then deal with any ambiguity. Turning to the sites and areas of significance to Māori chapter, my evidence concludes that the amendments sought by Transpower to various rules to provide for the operation, maintenance and upgrading of the national grid are not necessary. This is because the rules are highly unlikely to be relied on, given that the National Environmental Standards for Electricity Transmission Activities provides the regulatory framework for such activities. So I don't support the relief in Transpower's submission and think that those amendments are unnecessary.
Okay, can I just pause there? I'd like to record that formally. So Transpower aren't withdrawing their submission, are they? You're just
no, I can't do that on their behalf,
No,
but my evidence doesn't support the relief sought by Transpower.
Okay, I just need to record that. Just bear with me a minute. So what rules are those in particular? Is that all rules?
It's any of the rules.
Any of the rules?
Any of the rules. The Transpowers relief. I can tell you the submission numbers if you wish.
Yes, that would be good.
Okay, so it's submission 218.052
Yes.
and 218.053,
Yes.
218.054.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. What about
Right.
policy? What about
Yes, so
policy?
that's it. My evidence also concludes that there is still a need for policy direction in respect of the operation, maintenance and upgrading of the national grid. And I support an amendment to policy SASMP4 to achieve this. And I note that the Section 42A report introductory statement recommends that this amendment is made.
That's new clause E. Operation, maintenance,
Repair and upgrade of the national grid. Yes, that's the one.
Thank you.
Now, my evidence goes on to consider Transpower's further submission on primary submission made by the generators that seek amendments to many of the policies to remove reference to the term proximity and visually encroach upon so that the policies are more certain. In a nutshell, my evidence concludes that plan users should be entitled to rely on the process for mapping the sites and areas of significance to Māori, such that applying policies that reach beyond the boundary of the identified sites is unnecessary. Now, the introductory statement that you've received doesn't agree with my evidence, and the two reasons given are this. The first is that the identification and mapping in the proposed district plan is focused on specific parts of the Wairarapa, and there are parts where sites and areas of significance to Māori have not been identified or mapped. And the second reason is that sites and areas have intangible values that can be difficult to define spatially and are not only confined to the areas shown on the planning maps.
Yes.
In relation to the sites that have not been mapped, in my view, the retention of reference to proximity and visually encroached upon in the various policies does very little to respond to the effects on such sites in any case. If you think of the effect of that policy on a site that's not identified at all, it might be quite limited. That said, where sites and areas are not mapped, I have wondered whether these areas should be distinguished from those that are mapped and a different management approach adopted, rather than having the uncertainty in the provisions for all sites mapped and not mapped. What I'm suggesting is sometimes this happens more frequently for Indigenous biodiversity values, where there's a policy response to the identified sites and another policy response to sites that haven't been identified. In this regard, I understand the Section 32 report indicates a level of rigour around the mapped sites and areas. And what I'm suggesting is where there is that rigour, there's not the need for the uncertainty in the policy. In terms of the intangible values that extend beyond the site, it's my view that a precautionary approach should be taken to internalising those values within the schedule site. In my view, this is more aligned with Sections 6, F and G of the RMA, and also has the advantage of directly triggering the requirement for a resource consent where there is a possible impact on those values, as opposed to relying on an activity needing a resource consent for a completely different reason in order to manage the effects on cultural values. At paragraph 47 of my evidence, I set out the amendments that I support, but noting that I've also made the suggestion today, but that perhaps there are two different responses to identified and not identified sites.
Yes.
The final matter I wish to raise this afternoon is in relation to policy SASMP6. My evidence concludes that insofar as the policy relates to the national grid, the policy fails to give effect to the National Policy Statement for Electricity Transmission Activities. This is because the policy includes a direction to avoid more than minor residual effects, and the NPSET does not require such effects to be avoided. The Section 42A report introductory statement does not agree with the amendments to Policy P6 that I support in my evidence, on the basis that the policy provides for activities that have a functional need for locating in a site or area of significance. I acknowledge that Clause A of that policy provides a pathway where there is a functional need. However, the issue isn't in terms of that part of the policy. The issue is the endpoint in Clause C, small Roman 3, that requires an activity to be avoided as the endpoint of the hierarchy in that policy. To address this, I continue to support a national grid-specific clause in the policy that imposes a seek to avoid a direction that is consistent with Policy 8 of the National Policy Statement for Electricity Transmission. And from there, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, we can start with the last one first.
Yes.
What's your recommended relief in relation to P6, C, Roman numeral 3?
I've suggested an additional clause. It's in paragraph 57 of my evidence that is a national grid specific clause that addresses effects in the way the national policy statement does, and doesn't precisely mirror, but takes the approach that is often taken to the national grid across the country.
Okay, I see that now. Yeah. Clause X, yes.
Yes, that's right.
Policy statement, right?
Yeah.
Now you've moved to it.
So what? How would that leave? How would that leave the chapeau to? Okay.
Managed by, in the case of the national grid, seeking to avoid.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So that policy that you recommend is a carve out of P6.
Yes, that's commonly what a lot of national grid provisions end up being termed. Yes.
Yes. Can you give us some examples of where that's been used?
There are a number of carve-outs, recent carve-outs. There's perhaps the most recent one of all is a carve-out that's been agreed for the Marlborough Environment Plan, a unitary plan at the tail end of appeals. And as opposed to this that sits in the sites and areas of significance chapter, what's more common is that the carve-out ends up sitting in the infrastructure or network utilities chapter in the case of this plan, where there'll be a national grid specific effects of policy that deals with all of the effects of the national grid on all types of values in one place, and it carves out to the extent that there's often a clause that says that will prevail over, for instance, an avoid policy like this one.
Did you give any thought to trying to work within the current wording and modify C and leave A and B?
That potentially could work as well. The point is that the endpoint needs to be the direction in the MPSET is the most stringent direction is seek to avoid.
Okay. Yes. If the panel was to run with X as the carve out, what implications would that have for the rules? Would there be some?
None at all, because my evidence is you don't need the rules.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, except for if it were new national grid assets.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you'd probably be turning to the network utilities chapter. I can probably foreshadow my evidence for the next hearing stream deals with some very similar matters of whether you carve out or do something different in each of the chapters, or whether you start to think about a more effective and efficient approach could be to have a standalone managing the effects of the national grid policy that does all that needs to be done to give effect to the NPS in one place.
Yes, from an effectiveness and efficiency point of view. Yes, okay. What hearing stream are you referring to? Is that
hearing stream 6?
Yes, next one. Next week.
Yeah.
Okay. We we may ask you and the officer after that hearing stream 6 to conference on both hearing stream 5 and 6 solutions in relation to cut rather than direct that now. And that would be
Yes.
something for next year.
Oh, that would be good.
I'm clear on what you're trying to achieve. I'd like it to be consistent if the panel does run with that. So, yes, we'll provide some direction following next week's hearing on that for both 5 and 6. Between 5 and 6.
Okay, thank you.
Can we come back to the further submission on the terms proximity to and visual encroachment? The summary statement by Ms. Adams has you quite rightly said that these policy references are still important for areas that aren't mapped or are outside, or for activities outside areas that are mapped. As a general principle, particularly for the latter one, do you accept that? Except that there could be effects on areas identified as SASMs from activities that are outside SASMs?
My view is very much that where there are the values, they should be internalized, if you like. They should be within the area identified, and I think that's more consistent with what the RMA tells you should do. I did that sort of identify and protect thing. I've had experience, particularly in relation to landscape values, where there have been rules effectively a buffer on the outside of an identified outstanding or significant natural landscape. And my view is that if you need that buffer, the values must be present, so that in fact the protected area should be bigger.
Well, that was my next question. Isn't the quid pro quo that with the absence of those references in the policies, the mapped areas would have to extend?
Yes.
And you're not suggesting that, are you?
Well, no, I sort of am, because if the values are present and they ought to be identified and they satisfy the statutory tests to be identified and protected, then they should be identified and protected. So if that does mean that the areas should be bigger to capture those values, then that's what ought to happen, and it provides that greater level of certainty rather than, for instance, if you were transparent, you were going through your route and corridor selection process and you think you're okay because you've avoided the identified area, that you might not be okay if the values are still present. So the certainty afforded by the identification and taking that precautionary approach to ensuring the values are internal and within the identified site would be an approach I would support.
The council have been criticised for extending the mapped areas of SASMs from point sources to polygons. To further extend those areas to capture a quasi buffer would create further issues, and the policy framework is predicated on having an identified area, but also the ability to assess those activities that need a consent outside the identified area against these policies on the basis that it's only those consents that are of some certain magnitude that trigger the need for a consent that would be captured by the policy.
Yes.
Doesn't that strike you as being sort of practical in the scheme of things?
Maybe I'm not that popular with my view that you internalize all the values, but my view is that it's not, there could be permitted activities that have impacts on those values because those activities have been permitted through a separate Section 32 evaluation and not necessarily been considered in relation to cultural values. there's only a subset of activities that would ever be captured outside of those sites and areas of significance. It really does boil down to some of those tests in section 32, I think, about what is the most effective and efficient.
Yeah.
And where I got to today, having thought about the sites that aren't identified, I sort of started to think about things like the way a lot of plans respond to the Indigenous biodiversity uncertainty, where there's protected sites and then there's other sites, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
Mm.
And that approach that I've just outlined has been adopted with those sites of biodiversity where they are not identified in other district plans.
Yes, but I think the proximity to and visually encroach upon, it's only saying when you're close to something that's already identified. It's not really addressing the sites that aren't mapped.
Yeah. So do you have an issue with is your issue with the sites that are mapped and the proximity, or the sites that aren't mapped, or both?
Well, the way I read the provisions that have the proximity and visual encroachment clauses, that's really dealing with the mapped sites. My concern was that that's not dealing effectively with the not mapped sites.
Okay, yeah, notwithstanding the explanation in the summary statement.
Yeah,
Okay.
Well, that's sort of how I understood it.
Well, let me put this question to Mr. McLeod. If it was made clear, and I think it is, that these policies only apply to the map sites in terms of proximity to and visual dominance, would you live with that, or do you still have a concern with that?
I still would support internalising the areas where the values exist within the site itself.
And
I think it's almost extending the site without knowing where the boundary is by using those words in the policy.
Okay, an example that was given by the officer today was wind farms that require a consent in all zones. So there's no permitted wind, well, of a utility scale anyway. So they could have an effect on the values of a map site, but be outside the map site. Would it be inappropriate to consider the effects of the wind farm on the values of a SASM, even though it doesn't intersect with the SASM directly?
Well, I think you would do that anyhow if they all require consent and it were discretionary activity.
Okay, well, wouldn't it be nice to point to a particular policy that enabled that assessment to be undertaken?
Well, I understand your point and I accept that, but there'll be numerous other examples where it's not. And the point I make is that it's less certain to effectively create a buffer through policy where you don't know if you're in an area of significance or not. The point of Transpower submission, and it's a point that I support, is when you're trying to select a route for say a transmission line, district plan maps are such a valuable resource, and having those maps as certain as possible enables the best route to be selected.
Yes, I understand that, but certainly the route selection wouldn't focus solely on the district planning maps. It would look at the policies and rule framework that underpin those maps. So in the case of SASMs or in the case of Indigenous biodiversity areas, the person that doing the route selection would look at policies such as P5 and P4 surely, and to determine that it's not just the mapped areas that need to be considered, it's any developments that are in close proximity to those mapped areas may, for other reasons, trigger a consent, and those policies might be a consideration.
Yes, they would at the latter stages of that acre model that I describe in my evidence, but at the initial stages when you're determining the area and the corridor, it's very much a mapping of constraints exercise. It's what you know to be on the ground and what you know to be protected.
Okay. Okay. Do you think this topic's is worthy of further discussion with Miss Adams, or do you think you're reasonably polarised? She's given her view in her summary statement.
I'm always happy to discuss.
Miss Robertson, I should say. Miss Robertson.
I'm always happy to continue the discussions and
Okay.
grateful to be able to find a pathway.
Okay.
I'm in your hands.
Well, I'm not going to direct it. I'll leave it to both you to determine whether you would like to do that. It would probably need to be in the next couple of weeks.
That's fine. No holiday plans.
Okay. Continuing working backwards, I think. Okay. I think they were the last two areas of contention, weren't they? Further
Yes.
submission and P6.
Yes, that's right.
You don't have a further statement that you've been reading from, have you?
I have my speaking notes and I suspect you're going to ask me to send them to you.
I am. I think you know me so well. Well, not to me, to Ruth, please.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's been good discussion. Thank you. Oh, let me just check. Sorry. No, everyone else is fine. Okay, fine. Thanks again. We're keeping to time.
Brilliant. Thank you for your time.
Hey, this takes us to the penultimate submitted for today. Mr. Cooper, for the Office of the Maori Trustee. Welcome again, Mr. Cooper. This is the third time we've seen you, and you've got Ms. McKinley with you also.
Yes, I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just asked the Chair, you're happy with the statement you received, the statement that we provided on the 5th of December?
We are, and I've got a question for you too. Have you had a chance to read the summary statements from the 42A officer?
I did. I did think that the summary statements were much the same.
Well, the summary statements reference any evidence that's come in post the 42A report.
I read there was a reply statement.
Okay, this was posted on the webpage on Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we didn't see the Māori trustees hearing statement until after the election got issued. So
you might not have heard that, Mr. There was some crossover between your hearing statement and the summary statement being produced. The summary statement doesn't reference your hearing statement. So on that basis, I think take us through your key issues and we'll see where we get to from there.
Certainly. Okay. Shall I begin?
Please do.
Okay. Tēnā koutou. So my name's Nicholas Cooper and I appear on behalf of the Maori trustee, Dr. Charlotte Severn. I'm a resource and environmental specialist at Te Tumu Paeroa, the Office of the Maori Trustee, based in Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington. Dr. Severn thanks the hearing panel for the opportunity to speak to the Maori Trustee's submission points relevant to the hearing stream 5 on sites and areas of significance to Māori for the proposed Wairarapa Combined District Plan. The Maori Trustee wishes to firstly acknowledge the rangatani o Wairarapa and Ngāti Kāinunu ki Wairarapa as mana whenua. Today I will focus on highlighting the Māori Trustee's key points in our statement. The Māori Trustee respectfully considers the following matters are not adequately resolved within the Officer's report. And why a definition for Māori land was proposed. The Māori Trustee's submission proposed a definition for Māori land as she was concerned that Māori freehold landowners were not expressly provided for in the proposed plan. Our relief sought was intended to be applied throughout the whole proposed plan, rather than being limited to only within the multi-purpose zone chapter. This request was made for consistency and implementation purposes, as well as to ensure that the owners that we represent are able to actively engage with relevant plan chapters such as sites and areas of significance to Māori. However, in considering a definition, the Council's Section 42A reporting officer considered that the addition of hapu and whānau to the strategic direction tangata whenua objectives would provide in part for the relief sought by the Māori trustee. At a meeting on 2nd December, as reported in the officer's Māori Purpose Zone reply statement, Mr. Wesley considered that a definition for Māori land would have no functional purpose as no current rules or standards in the proposed plan relate to it. The Māori trustee recognises that the reference to hapu and whānau, whilst not her preference, could be a pragmatic solution to her concern. She recognises that this amendment, if consistently applied, and if Council could ensure that Māori landowners are able to engage with aspects of the plan in their own right, may provide an adequate solution. The Māori trustee also seeks the following further relief. Recognition of owners of Māori land for the identification and management of SASMs. The Māori trustee submission proposed replacing tangata whenua with owners of Māori land in the sites and areas of significance objective 2, policies 1 to 5 and policies 7 to 9 to enable Māori landowners to identify, manage, maintain and preserve their sites and areas of significance to Māori. However, after considering the officer's 42A report, the Māori trustee agrees that the use of owners of Māori land in this instance may have narrowed the ability to identify SASM outside of Māori land. This was not our intention, and we recognise that SASM do not exclusively apply to Māori land. The Māori trustee is concerned that the tangata whenua strategic direction objectives will not enable Māori landowners to identify, manage, maintain and preserve SASM on their whenua. The Māori trustee considers that a potential solution could be to add hapu and whānau after the occurrences of either Rangatani o Wairarapa and Ngāti Kahanunu ki Wairarapa or tangata whenua within the SASM objectives and policies as we had proposed in Appendix 1 of our statement. The addition of the words hapu and whānau throughout the SASM chapter will also align with the officer's report, which states that rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga are a part of the values of Māori landowners to exercise as part of their tikanga Māori. The Māori trustee understands that other submitters also requested that the proposed plan provide for Māori landowners to maintain their relationship with SASM on their land. In the final matter, providing support for landowners, Māori trustee's submission was to include the words and resource after support within the chapu for policy SASM P policy 7. The Māori trustee considers that while there are other methods outside of the proposed plan that could address the resourcing of landowners, we do consider it may be appropriate to add the words and resource under SASM Policy 7 Part D. This would acknowledge the plan uses the Council's responsibility to provide resourcing to landowners to help them manage, preserve and protect SASMs on their land. In conclusion, once again, the Māori trustee thanks the panel for the opportunity to formally speak to these issues and is happy to take questions if the panel has any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Ms. McKinley, do you want to add anything before we go to questions?
I'm happy to go to questions.
Okay, thanks. Robin.
I just have a question around adding the words and resource. Resourcing to me means, well, it says here in paragraph 25 of the statement that was submitted, through council providing financial or other resourcing to landowners. I'm not sure if you understand how small our three councils are and how limited our finances are. and the process for any unbudgeted expenditure. I'm just really curious as to how the Māori trustee feels that councils would be able to resource or finance any of this. Have you got any answers for that?
Māori trustee respects the needs of councils to account carefully for their finances and to not overly burden their ratepayers with expensive rates increases and policies. However, we would like some more input into or explanation in the meaning of how council through a proposed plan could assist the landowners to in identifying, preserving, managing, and maintaining SASMs, because we feel that it would be incentivize them to want to be part of a protection management ethos for SASM sites. We council are, through a proposed plan, identifying effectively expanding the sites and areas of significance to Māori. It might be reasonable for landowners to think that there could be more effort made to put forward ideas of how they could be helped and when they have those sites and areas of significance to Māori on their lands, because they are then, landowners are then not going to say encumbered, but there are some restrictions on what they can do with their land because of the identification of SASMs.
So on that, then you are including, because not all SASMs are on Māori land. So
this is not just about SASM that are on Māori field land. This is about on general land in addition to Māori land.
Okay.
Mr. Cooper, would the wording as proposed, as notified, which doesn't use the word resourcing, but uses the word support, would that preclude resourcing, including financial or other methods, if the word resourcing wasn't used?
Mr. Chair, I'm sure support is a word with broad intent that would potentially include resource or resourcing. However, in our statement, we thought that that part of the policy, referring to assistance, could also benefit from it, expanding to outline that assistance includes resource or resourcing.
Understood. Just check if there are any further questions on any of the other matters raised. The hapu and no. I'll just check Mr. Wesley and Miss Morgan's fellow is on line. Any points of Morgan or Hamish, any questions of clarification on those two particular matters that have been raised by Morgan? Awesome.
I would just like to acknowledge Mr. Cooper's comments there around support, and that support could be a broader term that could include resourcing in that policy 7. And I have no further comments in terms of the hapu and whānau comment matter.
Yes, Mr. Cooper was saying that his absence of opposition or support for those terms is on the basis that the terms are used consistently throughout the entire plan, not just the SASM chapter or the Maori purpose. So did you have any comment on that?
I don't think I can comment on the other aspects of the other chapters. I would need to talk to the other Section 42A officers to make sure that we're being consistent with what we decide on there and recommend.
Okay, I'll just check with Mr. Wesley.
I think my view is conceptually I support it. Just need to look at the context for where tangata whenua is used in every case, and Rangatani and Ngāti Kahungunu.
Yes, you heard that, Mr. Cooper? Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I don't have any further questions, but Joe does, I think.
Yeah, Mr. Cooper. I think I might just wait till Hamish comes back, until Mr. Wesley comes back with his points around and resources support on your submission. Because I also look at, with, as you say, and as we've said, is that councils, especially in the Wairarapa, are limited on financial resource that is available to help our whānau. Bearing in mind our whānau are also ratepayers as well. That's like boom, boom. And so I might just wait. I had a question, but I just want to see a little bit more information around this reason. Financial reasons. Theory of it. I don't know if it sounds like a bit of a.
No, that's fine. I think we understand. Mr. Wesley, again, I'm not going to give any direction on discussion, but I'll leave it to you and Mr. Cooper to work through that continuity and consistency matter, and you might want to share your thoughts with Mr. Cooper on behalf of the Murray trustee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apart from that, thank you both. Will we be seeing you next week at all? Part two of the other days?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we are intending to present at hearing stream 6.
Good. Okay. We'll see you then. Thank you both for attending online.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. At 4:30, that brings us to, I can't believe we're almost bang on time. Never happened before. Workman, Nairi Webb and Karen Makaira. Like to come forward? Yeah. Okay. Welcome, Mr. Workman. I didn't see you out of the corner of the eye. I was looking straight ahead. Must have snuck in.
New wheels since we seen you last. Yes, well, I've had another operation, so I'm back where I started. Okay. But it's on the other knee, so I'll be dangerous in 3 months' time.
So,
Not now.
So, Mr. Workman, you're representing the Kawakawa Trust.
Yes.
And we have three pieces of information from you, as well as your original submission. How do you want to present this?
Well, I think the 3 bits of information came in the last couple of days. It was really in response to the officer's assessment of missions. And clearly, it would be a bit difficult for you to respond because one of the key pieces of information was sent to you this morning. So, but perhaps if I start with the original submission,
Yes.
and summarise our view, because it was a long submission. And it was a bit different from most.
Is this the document that's entitled Matters in Contention, or is that something else?
No, that's something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it strikes me that the Matters in Contention might be the place to start.
It's a submission on the proposed district plan dated of December. Perhaps I could just introduce Nairi Webb, the chair of our
Afternoon, Nairi.
And has been the chair since 1992, I think, following and succeeded her mother. So we're had a long-term interest in the area around now. We have great relationships, I think, with the local community, with the farming community. This submission, however, really, we decided to do this because we feel that if we don't say something now, the opportunity to address some of the fundamental issues will be lost. And I started my submission by referring to the hikoi and Queen Ngāwai Honui Te Pō, who called on the Crown to embrace our shared identity and to live together in a way which represents peace, honour and goodwill. And it was evident from that day and from the korero that really transformed the setting for future discussion and the presence of a new generation of young Māori seeking transformational change. My own observation and the observation of many who have seen what happened during the treaty settlement process has been that it has impacted on us in such a way that Māori and iwi representatives have ended up after that process finding it difficult to trust either the Crown or one another. Tikanga Māori was set aside and as leaders became subject to both external and internal pressures. And if that meant treating whānau members and other Māori entities as adversaries, that is what happened. The korero that came when we had those big events, the apology and then the celebration at Papawai, was we are now united. You know, we're all moving in the same direction, and that's not true. So we've come to the view that the change of the kind required doesn't occur within an adversarial environment or a win-lose approach. It occurs when all parties are prepared to work collaboratively, consult widely with stakeholders, iwi, hapu and whānau, and in that process form a common vision. It occurs when both parties respect and trust one another and agree to work together for the common good. Our submission really says two basic things. That tangata whenua must call out any attempts by its leadership to centralise power and control over its constituents and to speak on a range of topics without any effort to consult and reflect the views of the people. We also believe that local government must ensure that its relationships with tangata whenua, that in its relationships with tangata whenua, it is not succumbing to a convenient style of consultation and engagement, which allows it to engage with one or two iwi entities on the false premise that those entities are authorised to speak on behalf of the wider Māori population. Now, I have to say that in our earlier submission, we put together a lot of ideas and recommendations about how that might occur. And I think the significant achievement in that was that we were met with an impressive number of rejection slips from council officers. I think probably a record. So we have, unfortunately concluded that either we're talking a load of nonsense or what we have to say is not what people want to hear. And given my own background and my career, which has been built on a spectacular failure after another, we decided it might be helpful to take a deeper look at what is going on what the future of our relationship with, especially with the South Wairarapa District Council and also the wider district councils should look like. And we have used the opportunity to look at the two sections on the plan, tangata whenua and sites of significance to Māori, asking ourselves the following questions. Do the proposed changes encourage an approach to organisational management which is inclusive and fair to all stakeholders? Secondly, do the recommended changes to the tangata whenua section promote the engagement of tangata whenua with the Wairarapa District Council? Are the changes, finally, in accordance with tikanga Māori? And as the previous speaker did, we looked at those core values of kaitiakitanga and rangatiratanga, and then had a closer look at a number of key issues. The role of iwi entities in WCDP consultation, and asked ourselves who then should the district councils consult with in order to be seen to engage in adequate and reasonable consultation. We probably reached beyond the issues of sites of significance and the definition of tangata whenua, because it also, obviously, any council will be addressing a series of issues from time to time around marae, ahu whenua landowners, whapakainga housing, social services, and so on. We've seen it, and we do acknowledge that the council doesn't have a lot of money. So the trick is, how do we manage a consultation process that can be seen to engage the whole of the Māori community and is, has the capacity to move beyond and below a couple of iwi entities to get to the issues that are of real concern. One of the things that we felt, and this may be unfair because we haven't been privy to everything that's is there seems to have been a lack of reference to earlier legislation, tribunal reports, and major consultation in the response from the officers. And it seems to almost be that there is an agreed kaupapa that they want to pursue, and that it would be useful to ignore some of those earlier precedents and just deal with this within a very limited construct. This is, I think, a significant issue because there is a tendency in the Wairarapa, and I must say I'm going to get myself into awful trouble over saying this, but if we don't start talking the truth, we're never going to get there. But there is a tendency for our kaumātua to hang on to positions of power and authority through a system of hierarchical authority and selective nepotism. In that scenario, the district councils are expected to engage with a handful of iwi leaders who then determine whether to involve other emerging leaders and or the community, or simply make decisions on their behalf. At its very worst, there are two things that could happen. Firstly, council officers can be advised that there has been a consultation when in fact none has taken place. We have never, for example, been consulted around this process other than through meetings that were held subsequent that were organised by the council. This form of gatekeeping results in councils getting poor information and key community representatives being left uninformed and powerless. The second possibility is council officers themselves are in a very difficult spot, especially if they're Māori, because they can be conflicted through relationships with iwi leaders and choose not to engage in full and frank discussion with the community. So we think it's important going forward to develop a consultation process which ensures that both the council and Māori engage in meaningful engagement. When excessive power and influence is accorded to one or two people, not only does it create a conflict of interest, but it encourages gatekeeping. What then is the ideal situation? And we turn to the submission from Anne Carter, who proposed amendments to reflect the full range of Māori rights and interest holders at place. Acknowledgement of the role of Māori landowners as kaitiaki in relation to sites and areas of cultural significance of the whenua. We also are concerned that sometimes at the hapu level, some of the entities that purport to represent hapu, may not have as much buy-in or as much support as would seem apparent. And this came through in the MECA negotiations when, in reference, I reference Ngāhine Waka Me Ona Hapu Karanga Trust and explain the whakapapa of that trust and how it was formed, who formed it, and who now is eligible for membership. And it is important because while we don't know what the future holds in relation to MECA, and we're awaiting Justice Gwynn's decision on Waihi Tapu. It should be come out, we think, at any time. But all the Wairarapa applicants have asked that they submit Waihi Tapu submissions to the High Court in around August 2025. And it seems to me that what might be happening is they are awaiting the result of this hearing. And they want to build into this hearing conditions, circumstances which might assist them in the work ahead. In our own submission to the High Court, we recommended that the court requires all applicants to meet in accordance with agreed tikanga and discuss and recommend to the court how a recognition order could be managed and by whom. That the entity holding the recognition order is representative not of the applicant trust, but of all iwi who are in that area. So we're asking for a commitment to wide hapu and iwi consultation and engagement, a commitment to transparent communication with hapu and clear accountability for its action, and a separation of role and function between iwi kaitiaki or pukenga and the governance body. There is example after example in our submission of conflicts of interest. Now, this goes probably beyond what the hearing panel was anticipating. But I think we would say to you that the issues we have raised lend themselves to a broad consultative process rather than being, narrowly confined to planning documents. I think we need to do this. Otherwise, the councils are going to end up getting shonky advice, and a lot of people out there who are suffering seriously at the moment, and who may or may not have interests in Māori land or right, are going to be unheard. And if we think about the last 40 years, there's plenty of examples of that. So I just want to leave that with you at this point.
Mr. Workman, that's a valuable contextual statement of what's happening nationally, regionally, and in the High Court. I have to ask the question, what does it mean for the Wairarapa Combined District Plan, though? And I just would invite you to focus on maybe this document titled Matters in Contention. If you'd like to briefly, and we need to wrap that up.
Right.
Briefly speak to what changes that context mean for this plan.
In that, it must be that paper I wrote, and apologising for our lateness in our submission.
That's fine. The statement was only, the officer's summary statement was only prepared a few days ago.
Yes. Yeah. And I raised, what in that the role of owners of Māori land, tangata whenua, and also the specific issue of identification and mapping of sites and areas of significance to Māori. What I've described, I guess, in my earlier report was that at the worst, we could just end up with more of the same. However, if the hearing panel was so inclined, then we might, actually set up an example to other local bodies as to how to do this. And I did raise with that we should further explore work that has already been done, and that would include Waitangi tribunal decisions, responses to legislation such as submissions to the Environmental Committee on the Spatial Planning Bill and the Natural and Built Environmental Bill, and in particular the contribution of Te Taikaha Māori Collective, which was formed to assist the Crown in understanding and recognising the interests and rights of Māori in relation to this process. The Taha Māori Collective was a combination, an agreement between the New Zealand Māori Council and the Federation of Māori Authorities. There were representation there by people like Annette Finlayson, people who lived these issues for the last 30 or 40 years. And they wrote a series of very helpful documents. I think I sent up the original primer, and the template that was developed for individual whānau, and the interim report on Māori appointments to regional planning committees, a Waitangi Tribunal report. And if we look, for example, at the tribunal report, it includes lots of arguments for iwi hapu Māori having rights in resource management processes. It also looks at the specific proposals in the last reform process, and how Māori would not nominate representatives onto regional decision-making bodies. And acknowledging that this has got to be an efficient exercise as far as the council is concerned. We think that if that was to happen, we could set the standard in the Wairarapa for the way in which the council and the iwi entities function and operate.
Okay.
To be honest, this
Whitman, I'm going to have to stop you there.
Sorry.
Unless there's anything more specific you want to tell us about the changes that Kawakawa Trust would like made to the plan over and above what's contained in this document.
Yes. Certainly we would want to have a say around the issues of sites and areas of significance to Māori and also Waihi Tapu. And we think that whole kaupapa has been underrepresented within this exercise. Our kaumātua Mr. Carter and Bill McClarty held the view that Māori landowners should resist making the identification and mapping of those sites public. It's a bit of a myth, let me put it this way. One of our local politicians has referred to that idea as a myth. It's not a myth. And when you all talk around the iwi, a lot of the reasons why we don't have many recognised sites in the Carterton area is in the South Wairarapa is because kaumātua are fearful that if they do that.
We heard about that this morning.
Yes.
From another witness.
So we're looking at a silent file. We suggested a silent file.
Mr. Workman, I'll just see whether panel members have any specific questions.
No, not split.
Yeah, I just, can you clarify for me? Are you saying that you are objecting to the sites of significance being mapped in the district plan on Māori owned land?
No.
So what are you trying to tell us?
What I'm trying to say is that let me put it this way. The original letter that came from the South Wairarapa District Council to ratepayers announced that they were going to identify these sites without any consultation with local Māori owners or iwi or owners of Māori land. That is offensive, and we would have expected the council to say, are you okay with this?
Okay, that letter came out when?
Came out very early in the piece.
Yeah. So 2 years ago?
Yep.
Okay.
So what we're asking really, and we did write and say that we're unhappy, because we're a ratepayer too. I
want to flow the process through to get to what you're asking for. So council wrote to you, replied back. Did we get a copy back?
No,
I'd need to check.
Okay.
I can provide a copy.
So this is 2 years ago, obviously.
Yeah.
In the intervening,
Like 2 years ago.
about to, yes.
Last.
Was that around the time that the draft plan,
Yes,
or was that at the notified plan? October last year, the plan was notified, but a year before that, a draft plan was put out and asked for feedback. So did Kawakawa Trust respond to the draft plan in 2022? Okay.
No, we wouldn't have known about it. We
No.
wouldn't have known about it.
You would have, due respect, all parties would have been written to and comments invited.
well, Nairi can explain that because at that stage, the rates were being, the letters were going to the
Yes.
Kawakawa Trust.
So,
Listen to letters, there was quite a significant public campaign in the media and social media and on the web page.
yeah, no,
You went
I didn't pick that up, but
That's
our anything from the council goes to our lessee because they pay the rates.
okay.
Getting back to your point, I think it's an important one, and let me answer it from our perspective as a, Ahu Whenua Trust. I think for us, the ideal thing would be to say, if we were approached, we would be able to identify which sites we would like to see, on the plan, on Schedule 4. The problem we've got at the moment is that we do have a site that we want to see on Schedule 4, and the Kaitiaki has said that it's not a wahi tapu, no consultation. The second thing is that we would probably identify 1 or 2 sites which we would not want to see there. There is well, this may be in contention, but there's at Maunga Mate, which means Death Mountain, is a what's it called, burial area.
Okay, with that, could I then ask, so
Yes.
this is the time to put those, say, I want this and I want that out. This is what this hearing is about, to understand where you sit on that. So if you've got those views, why have you not presented those views to us today so that we can make those decisions for, having heard from you and then go, okay, this is what we've heard and that's what we've heard, and then make the decision.
But if you read the earlier submission, we did. We asked that the Punuriku wetlands and lagoon, and we talked about it. We identified that in, I think, 2000, the Greater Wellington Council produced a detailed report of all the sites and areas of significance to Māori, and that was one of them. And not only that, the person who wrote that report, Jason Kerehi, was an employee of the Greater Wellington Council, and his report was reviewed by a number of kaumatua, including Mr. Tawhaiti. Now, on that basis, we said it's not there. There are no sites on none of the sites of significance have been attributed to our land. There's a big gap. So we said, well, for a start, we want that one acknowledged. Mr. Tawhaiti told us that it wasn't a wahi tapu, full stop. Where's the consultation and that? So that submission is there for you to read, and you can make a decision. The other issue was that there were other sites which are not visible in terms of anchorage places of historical interest. And we don't see any need to tell you about them because they are not physical, entities. They are places of history. So those wouldn't be declared to you. But if there was an issue, and we've been helping our neighbour from Kawakawa Station, which has a huge and very significant site on its land, and that is the Otakaha stream, and there's a lot of burials on the foreshore. There's a Wairarapa, which was where my great-great-grandfather lived, is there. They got their house next door, and they wanted to do the right thing. And they're saying, can you make sense of Schedule 4 and the criteria that one has to meet in terms of waitapu or sites and areas? And, you know, there's a lot of conditions around impairing the view, proximity, which were discussed earlier. You know, we applied that template to this situation. It included that there was to be no power boating on the sea, you know, in front of the site. We couldn't power boat there anyway. And there's a lot of nonsense in it. And so we came to the view that it would be better if we were able to sit down with our neighbours, good people, and design something that would meet your criteria, but not be ridiculous, you know.
Any further questions? No, thanks, mate. Fraser, one, excuse himself. Joe, Brian.
Thank you. If the sites of significance in our trust area were recognised, would that make a difference to the polygons that are there now? The polygons that are mapped now, do they include all your sites of significance in them, or are they outside that area?
What we did say is that we referred back to the 1998 report.
88.
The
Gumbley report.
The Gumbley report, which actually identified all that stuff. And then we got hold of the new map, which I think was developed from that. And we counted 15 sites on the foreshore, you know, of our land. Now we know that some of them are middens, and there's a whole string of them, which would make sense to identify them as one site, you know. The thing that we managed to do was there's a schedule in the Gumbley report which identifies the same numbers as are on the map. And in this latest submission, we identified what these 15 sites were about, and they were about middens, stone walls, a terrace, and you know, sort of quite a variety of things. So I would like to think that any new version we would be able to identify those sites, and we could either put the polygon on, as one is a larger area, isn't it? I think.
Polygon, yeah.
But at the moment, there's nothing there. So our question is, how come that next door in the Mātakitaki Kupe is full of these sites, and then the other side of us is full of these sites, and God has somehow or other declared that we've done something wrong and we're being punished, and therefore there will be no sites of significance.
Mr. Workman, I just wonder whether you might accept that this is a live process.
Yes.
And regardless of what decisions this panel might make in terms of what Schedule 4 contains now, that there is a very real opportunity to add to or subtract from Schedule 4 going forward. And I wonder whether that, putting aside what might have happened and what didn't happen, whether you take some confidence that there is a commitment to add to the Schedule 4 over time for the life of.
I can comment on that because we originally said that what we would like to do is to be able to work, as a local Māori landowner, to work with our farming community and others to help explain the process, because we found a lot of farmers were dead against it. Well, when we sat down and talked about it, they were much more open. The trouble is that your planning officer on that issue has suggested that the identification of further sites should be left for another planning process, and that if people tangata whenua wanted to put up another place as a proposed new site or area of significance, they could. Now, what that is doing is taking the responsibility away from the council to actually manage and facilitate long-term process.
Have a role in that, Mr. Workman.
It needs to have more than one.
Should have a role.
Yeah.
Look, we'll consider that further, and it may be that our recommendation might reflect that future process. But in the absence of any further questions, I think we might call it a day if you don't mind. Okay. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you.
We will adjourn the hearing for just a brief moment.